Welcome to Insights in Touch, the podcast where industry insight meets meaningful conversation. Hosted by Kristin Thorne, this series presented by iFraud Foundation explores the real issues facing the property and casualty insurance world. It's the pulse of an industry under pressure and the voices working to protect its future. Stay informed, stay connected, stay in touch. Now, here's your host, Kristin Thorne.
I want to introduce Don Orlando, the Director of Litigation at Tradesman Program Managers, and really like the man taking on this fight, Don, right? You're like just
Yes,
getting it
the
done.
pioneer, right? Yes, we took that step forward.
Bring me through how this all happened. And, when I was reporting on this, I think you brought me through the history of here is this company. Yes, you'd get maybe a fraud claim here or there. But what happened? Why did tradesmen decide, and Dan Hickey, we have to fight this?
So in 2021 or the latter part of 2020, I started auditing the claim files. And what I saw in the claim files was a lot of similarities. I saw folks who were migrants on construction sites who staged very similar accidents. Everything looked the same. They went to the same doctors, same group of lawyers, same treatment protocols. And one of the things you look at from a forensic perspective is the medical treatment, right? What are the protocols? So typically, if someone is legitimately hurt, they may go through an X-ray, a CAT scan, go to the emergency room, things like this. These were all specific. They went to the same radiology groups, the same physical therapy groups. All of them, whether they said they hurt their hand or anything else, all had cervical fusion, which is a spinal surgery to the neck, and lower back fusions as well. So when you're looking at it, they're all the same. So I'm like, wait a minute, So at that time, I think, I had looked at about 200 files and about 100 of them were outright fraudulent. Another 50 were probably fraudulent. So what you have is you have two types of cases. You have a staged accident where it's completely staged. They go out there, they'll stage it. It's unwitnessed. Sometimes it's not reported. Some of these people never even work for a trade contractor. That's one part. Then you have someone who actually had an accident or something minor. So let's say someone, hurt their hand in a machine or something like that, or something minor. All of a sudden having neck and back surgery. They're all the same doctors and all. So then, as Tradesman's book grew, so did the fraud. So Tradesman wrote workers' compensation for a few years. And in looking at those workers' compensation cases, they were all the same as well. Same lawyers, same doctors. So when you look at that forensically, these cases are fraudulent, and they're really easy to prove. So what happens is you have the Workers' Compensation Board, which is pretty liberal, right? Pretty understaffed. The person comes in, and that sort of funds that medical treatment. And during the pandemic, the cases just skyrocketed up. Um, and that's basically, the start. And then, when you start doing the investigation, we work with the various federal agencies, to assist us in this journey. And now, as you see, the cases in Washington, D.C., and it's called the fraudemic. It's a national thing. It's not just limited to New York, but pretty much New York has a labeled R, which imposes, absolute liability. So if someone says they fall from a ladder or things like that, those are absolute liability. There are no defenses, and those are statutory charges and non-deliverable duties to the owners and general contractors. So
Don,
you're
I don't
looking,
think we can underscore enough the what tradesman has done here. I mean, this is changing the landscape of the entire industry. We're now seeing Washington is taking note of this. There are
yes.
bills, there are letters being written to the Attorney General about how
Mhm.
serious this is. And I think that if tradesmen hadn't come forward with this and perhaps maybe my investigation,
Yes.
who knows where we would be?
Right. And you were on the forefront, Kristen. I remember when we met a few years back. Very difficult to believe, right? You come in there and you're like, so you're telling me there's, $100 billion in fraud out there and these accidents are staged. Very hard to believe. But, with your forensic, I would call it, journalism, going in there and looking and interviewing people and coming in with us, with our task force in some of those meetings, you picked it up pretty quickly. And you were a big assist because I don't think if we didn't get the national media attention, that this may not have gone as fast as it's gone. I mean, basically, we're about 4 years into the investigation. And look at what it's done. It's changed the total landscape. Typically like a plaintiff law firm, and there are plenty of legitimate ones. We're only talking about the fraudulent ones. Plenty of legitimate and hardworking plaintiff lawyers. But we're looking at the ones that aren't, right? And I made this comparison years ago with Barry Bonds. You had some of these law firms that were legit. They did a really good job for their clients. And like Barry Bonds, he took steroids and cheated to enhance. And I think they were looking at these other firms that were cheating and getting all this money and saying, hey, I want in on this. And then, that's the evolution of the runner, right? So, during the pandemic, we had a few things going on. We had a border that was sort of, porous and a lot of migrants coming in. And most migrants come to America for a better life. But all of a sudden they get hooked up with the big bad wolf, and these are gangs. And these gangs control the fraud. So when you look at it, there are various entities now deemed, foreign terrorist organizations that are the runners. They control the staged accidents. They work in conjunction with the law firms. Um, Litigation funding was a big part of that, right? Litigation funding comes in and compensates the runners. That's illegal. You can't pay a non-lawyer a fee on a case. And then when you look at it, all of a sudden now you have the doctors involved, right? And they're getting paid up front, right? Workers' comp is paying them. They may get some extra bonuses, which are very, suspect from the funding companies. And now you have a case that never existed that's now worth $6 million. We have cases on trial right now where the demands are 15, $18 million, completely fraudulent. So how did this happen? Like, how did this go on for so long? My involvement here, has been about 4 years into it, and it's surreal. How in the world can the judicial system allow probably in excess of $100 billion of money to be stolen from the trade contractors, from the building owners, from everyone, from you drive your car. And when you look at the cost of insurance, right, and everybody, if you buy a home, you have to have homeowners insurance. If you're a tenant or you lease a condo, you have to have insurance. Everybody pays for it. So when you look at the auto side, auto rates are through the roof. Everybody pays for it. And what I think the general public doesn't understand is that there's a pool of money for all insurance, whether it's construction, residential, anything like that. And when one side pays, you pay. They just keep raising rates, and it's really unfortunate because it's hurting everybody. And most people think, oh, it's a victimless crime. These are insurance companies. You have plenty hardworking, men and women that work at insurance companies, and they're honest. They come into work every day, and you see layoffs. You see, insurance companies pulling out of markets. Take a look at California, right? It's really hard to get insurance, and that's basically, the start of it. Going through it, it's an international criminal enterprise that came into the United States and sort of took it over. These are various nations. Doesn't matter where they are. When you can make an easy buck, you make an easy buck. And when you have a lot of people who are vulnerable, like I look at the migrants that, come in and they stage the accidents. These people are really poor. They come from third world nations. We are so lucky as Americans to live here. I mean, we're spoiled. Even if you're, in the poverty level here, you do okay and you survive. There, they don't. There, you don't eat. You don't have anything.
Yeah, and,
So they
and
come
Don, I
here.
think but that raises a really interesting part of this, which is how is it that migrants who come to this country who barely speak English are somehow filing multi-million dollar claims against US based companies? And I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that they aren't doing it.
No. Yeah, these are run. You're basically told what to do. Sometimes in life, if you go to school and there are bullies, you sort of join with them. But if you're told to do something and people can harm you, you're going to do it. So you're right. So this starts across in other nations, right? So the human traffickers who bring people into the United States, you pay for that. So you would pay probably $6,000 to $12,000 to get into the US. And what these cartels would do is you could pay the cash and you come over and they'll get you across the border, or you could have a credit, right? They run it like any other business. So you're going to pay double, 12 to $20,000 or whatever to get across the border, but you have to pay that back. And how do you pay that back? The big wet bad wolf in the US, who's a foreign actor, comes in, right? They tell you you're going to stage an accident. And on a lot of the cases, like we would look at some, if you owe a lot of money to the cartels, you're going to have to draw blood. You're going to have to jump. You're going to have to break a bone. And that's one of the things too, which is terrible. So you're looking at human trafficking. This fraudemic, as we call it, is much larger than insurance fraud. This is human trafficking. This is drug trafficking. These are criminal enterprises that come in from foreign nations and they come into the United States to commit crimes. People watch the news. You can see, what's going on nationally. But these are criminal actors. But look at New York. Look at states like California. In New York, you have the labor law. So Section 240, if you fall from a height or something falls on you allegedly, those impugn absolute liability to the owner and general contractors. So there are no defenses. So how easy is it to come in and say, I fell, right? And you got to realize we have safety protocols in place. Safety is number one to every contractor in New York. Every one of these clients, every one of the contractors I deal with, safety is number one. You have OSHA involved, right? So you have to be OSHA certified. OSHA, inspects jobs. And then you have the Department of Buildings that come in and they audit and they oversee the jobs. So safety is on the forefront. So when you look at a client that does everything right, their safety protocols are good, they have toolbox talks, and yet you have all these accidents. And what happens is you get a bad actor who works for one of the subcontractors who tells everybody how to fall. Now all of a sudden you have 50 accidents at the same location. So what we did was, as part of our forensic investigations, we looked at addresses, right? We have a system called ISO, which tracks, sort of a clearinghouse for personal injury claims, property claims, things like that. So we track the addresses. And as you know, in your forefront, in your news story, you track 30 people to one building. We have two buildings in particular that have 1,000 plaintiffs. So when you look at those, you're like, okay, this is absolutely fraud. But how do you get away with it? Like, why is this happening? And when you sit there, we have a legal system, right, that's supposed to take a look at those things and prosecute them. And that's been a little slow. It's very difficult to do. So Tradesman was on the forefront. They came in and said, hey, listen, we're going to have to go in and do this. And we should not be the police of the industry, but we sort of are. When you have your legal system infiltrated by foreign nations, it's not a good thing. So for us, we filed multiple racketeering cases, which were monumental and nuclear throughout the industry. Once we filed the first one, in conjunction with your news story, one firm dropped, they said 200 to 300. It's 283 that we counted. Imagine that, 283 cases.
Yeah, that
283.
they had no problem with those cases up until I exposed them, you
Yeah.
exposed them, and I think and let's talk about that a little bit because I think what people don't know is that at least here in New York, so yeah, a lot of these personal injury law firms are now requesting to walk away from hundreds of
Yeah,
cases.
we're over 1,000 now. Yeah.
Right. But those cases are now, for the most part, being passed on to other attorneys. And so it raises the question, why do we have a judicial system by which a lawyer can stand up and tell a judge, Judge, we have a problem with the ethics of this claim. We no longer feel that this is an ethical claim. The judge goes, You're right. You're dismissed. You no longer have to do. And then as a judicial system, we give it to another lawyer to just continue taking on.
Right. And what happened is I got caught. Your story was monumental. When you broke the Carlos story on ABC News, that was huge because basically you had a staged accident, a man who never worked at a site, never treated with the doctor, goes to a law firm, allegedly signs a retainer, which he thought was an employment application, right? And all of a sudden he's treating at a medical facility.
Which wasn't
That's
him. Someone posed as him and took his ID, all of his information and posed as him at a
right.
physical therapist.
Now, you think about that, it's 3.5 to $6 million, right? Just that one case. Now think about 283 of those. We're talking billions from one firm. Then, during our investigation, when you look at it, these litigation funding companies, right? They don't have unclean hands. They're coming in and there's testimony and evidence that they knew the cases were fraudulent, yet they still funded them because the return on the investment is enormous. We looked at some of them, the interest rates of 50% or higher, compounded monthly. So let's say you borrow, $100, right? You compound that times 2 or 3 years, however long it takes these cases to go. At the end of the day, these migrant plaintiffs who are also co-conspirators to a crime, don't get me wrong, they are, but they're victims too. So when you look at that, at the end of the day, they get a 2 or 3 or $5 million settlement. What do they get? 100,000, and they've been paid already. And when you're poor and someone throws $10,000 or $20,000 to you, you spend it right away. It's your life. I mean, you have to understand how impoverished these nations are and how vulnerable these people are. And yet you have American companies, lawyers, doctors who don't care. I don't care. It's all about me. And when you look at the riches these people have, that's unacceptable. Because now you have somebody and realize they're doing cervical fusion. Those are huge. They fuse vertebrae together. They put plates in your back. They put screws into the bones in your spine. You're never the same. So if you're an active person in your 20s, right, and you have that surgery, maybe that surgery lasts 10 to 15 years. Those screws loosen up. Can you imagine somebody with no money now, having this massive back pain, surgery, no one to help them? And that's what they do. If you look at the Leslie Ortiz case that was reported in the New York Post, this poor woman was in her 20s and she had cervical and lumbar fusion. When she went to the hospital, and they told her, we're going to do an ablation, which is going in there, heating up. Now she comes out with plates in her neck and her lower back, deemed to be a fraudulent case, right? A vulnerable person again. Then all of a sudden she's got nothing. Something's got to change. You can't do that. And when you look at it, Kristin, as you had said, the judicial system, the courts have to take notice. You can't sit there and reinforce this fraud. A lot of the courts won't allow the racketeering cases. And now realize there's 32 federal and state cases out there for fraud. Someone should look at that. Administrative judges, Albany should look at that. Washington obviously has, thank goodness. You have to stop it. We can't have our legal system, hijacked by criminals. And that's basically what happened. And when you look at it, 1,000 cases withdrawn, right? There's litigation funding money. And as you had mentioned earlier to address your question, other law firms are taking the cases. Well, we have a firm that's out of Houston. I don't want to put names in the podcast, but they took over a lot of the cases. Now, if you're a lawyer and you do your due diligence and two firms, and there's cases that have gone from the starting firm to the next firm to the next firm, and these may be the third or fourth firm, why would you take it? And they told us the litigation funding companies are paying us because they don't want to lose the money. So when you look at that, you have a fraudulent case, you have a lawyer who takes an oath, they put their hand up, they take an oath to uphold the laws of New York State and the federal courts as well. Now you breach that oath, right? You have to do due diligence. We have plaintiffs, and there are thousands of them, with false names, false identities, stolen social security numbers.
Oh, and when you ask the judge to say, we would like to know the true identity of the plaintiff, the judge and the judge and plaintiff's counsel goes, no, you're not permitted. We don't have to give you that information, which really, blows my mind.
True. We have a case in Queens County where we have a man who's got 3 different identities. This man has 2 legitimate New York State driver's licenses that were issued by New York State under false names. He's got an e-license so he could drive rideshare. Now think about that. You have a criminal who potentially could be in one of those rideshare cases, cars that you get into that you don't know anything about. So that's a national security issue. In that Queens County case, which is the case I'm referencing, we got sanctioned over $8,000 for really asking for the name of the person, his true identity. And when you look at that, one would have to say, how can that happen? How in the world, in the United States of America, the greatest country in the world, can you not know who your accuser is, right? So we looked at it as a constitutional issue, right? Because you got to realize the damaged party isn't just the insurance company or those reinsurers, it's the actual clients. So you have a client that has no rights. You have a staged accident. We believe that one's a staged accident. The man testified he was dangling for 45 minutes, I believe, and it was a 31-inch foundation pour. So there's just no way when you look at his height and all, just a staged accident. Multiple surgeries, spinal stimulators put in his back, and then we're the ones that are being sanctioned. So can you imagine that being a small business owner getting sued and the court's telling you, no, you don't have those rights. You don't have to know who's suing you. It doesn't matter if this person's using a dead person's social security number. Now realize the calls we get. You get a call, hey, I haven't worked. You have a person who's 80 years old, in some of our cases, some younger, and they stole their social security number, right? So you ever try to call Social Security or any government entity to try to get it fixed? Very difficult. So now all of a sudden, well, you didn't pay your taxes. Those people are getting audited. So how can that happen? So it's nice to see that, that in Washington, they're taking notice of that. You have Social Security fraud. A lot of these, we're talking about construction, but moving on to the habitational, the apartments, the migrants do the staged accident on sidewalks, right? So Medicaid pays for that, and Medicaid pays for surgeries and things like that. So the defrauding, you got a fake name, fake social security number, fake ID. You don't even know who they are. So for us, for a client, you want to investigate a case. How do you investigate it when you don't know who the person is? Right. And if you read the papers for some of the people who have been arrested for the gun running and things like that, some of those cartels, he had ID for one name, but he was arrested under his real name. So if you come into the country and you don't go through the border patrol and you're not fingerprinted and ID'd, you're unknown. And that's a lot of our plaintiffs. So they could be anyone they want to. And it's unfortunate that law firms are taking cases over when in fact, and I would say it's a de facto confession that the case is fraudulent by the lawyer because they walked away from the cases. And how did the court say? I saw one of your interviews with one of the defense attorneys, and he said, "How can the courts allow the person just to walk away?" Well, I committed fraud, judge, but I'm going to have to walk away now. Thank you very much. That's unacceptable. And we're going to change that. We have to change the laws. Ethics are really important, right? So a lawyer takes an oath when they're sworn in. A lot of these lawyers are sworn in the state courts and federal courts. Two different sets of laws there. Doctors take a Hippocratic oath. I shall not harm somebody. I shall not cut somebody. They breach those oaths. And the days are coming. Tradesman was on that forefront. They had the courage and the wherewithal to go forward with it and say, enough's enough. And I said, in the presentations I've given, where's the industry? Right? There's a lot of blame to go around. But where's the industry as a whole? The bigger companies have to step up and say, hey, you know what? We want to lower premiums. We want to give a better product to our clients. And that's really what Tradesman's doing, because the lower your loss run, like your history of paying out on cases, the less insurance you're going to pay. And you know what? When that happens, the cost of rent goes down. Your car insurance goes down. The cost of eggs go down. You got to realize, like, if auto insurance is high and trucks deliver your product, you're going to pay more for that. You go into the city, a sidewalk slip and fall. Got to realize these are $2 and $3 million cases on those, right? So an apartment owner is going to say, hey, I got to raise your rent. I don't care. I don't have a choice. So everything goes up.
I get this question a lot. Has tradesmen seen a reduction in fraudulent claims since the filing of the RICO suits?
Yeah, it's a mammoth reduction, and it's a mammoth reduction in lawsuits as well. So Tradesman's book grew about 30%, over the past year. And I think a lot of clients say, hey, you know what? Someone's fighting for me. I want that guy. And if you saw the movie My Cousin Vinny, just joking around a little bit, where, Joe Pesci goes up and does a great job, I want him. And that's basically, where Tradesman is. They're taking a big market share of that because we have less claims, an increased book of business. And you know what? The lawyers know, hey, those are the tradesmen guys. I better look elsewhere. The path of least resistance from a psychological perspective, let me go get someone else. And the industry too, it's very difficult because when you've been doing the same thing for the past, 20 years, it's hard to change, right? It's hard to say, wow, RICO, what is that? It takes courage, it takes wherewithal, it takes superior legal minds. And we put together, as you know, a task force of over 30 people. We have CIA people on that task force, FBI, former retired FBI, military intelligence. So we have the ability to go to foreign lands and investigate there with our team, which is a big difference from what a typical insurance company would call an SIU or a special investigative unit. We have high level people who really know what they're doing, and it's not their first day at work. So the industry as a whole has to change. They have to take a look at what have we done? You can only raise premiums to so much. And Kristin, you've spoken to non-for-profits that can't put wheelchair ramps on people's homes because they can't get insurance. Those are the people who are really hurt. And when you look at some of the coverage we have, you have a job site accident, a sidewalk. They call 911, an ambulance comes. Well, what happens when a person's having a heart attack and they can't get an ambulance? What happens when they go to the emergency room and the other doctor is looking at a fake accident as opposed to taking care of someone who really needs it? So we have to fix that. And hospitals, the medical practice, the insurance industry have to police their own. The law firms, the ethics committees, and things like
And I
that. We
think
had
it
some.
also, Don, like people always ask me, and I know we have to, be sensitive about how you answer this, but where is law enforcement? I mean, they know this is happening. It's been in the news. The RICO suits are well documented. What do you think is going on?
Yeah, they'll trust me. The FBI and the Department of Justice are there. You realize to get a conviction, you want to be beyond a reasonable doubt, and you want to have everything. The federal prosecutors rarely ever lose. So they're there. You got to realize, Kristin, there's over 2,000 bad actors that we have on our list. So you're looking at lawyers, you're looking at paralegals, you're looking at employees in the firms, you're looking at runners, you're looking at cartels, you're looking at funding companies, and even banks. There's a bank in particular, when you see all these hit, you'll see where that money comes from. And when you front money to somebody, right, they talk of a term social inflation, right? When you look at that, what's social inflation or what is it that you get paid in advance? So that mark, which I would call the plaintiff in the migrant cases, gets 10 grand, 20 grand up front. They're rich. These people are living, multiple people in houses, sharing beds, some in warehouses. They get that money, and the lawyers and their friends take a upfront piece too. So now you got your money up front. You no longer have to worry. Then you go to trial and you tell the judge, Judge, I got a $2 million lien. We have a case where the funding company funded $5.8 million. $5.8 million, not our case particular. And the case settled for 750,000. So one would wonder, that's an underwriting thing with the funding company. Why would they do that? Then you follow the money. Where did that money go? Who did it go to? And when you look at some of these surgical centers, right? So normally in a hospital, you really can't get away with doing, botched surgeries or surgeries that are unnecessary. But all of a sudden, some of the bad actors own the facilities. So now you control that environment. So you can operate on anyone you want. Some of the cases we have, they actually do the surgery, they put screws in the spine, and some do cut and sews where they don't do them. So, when you talk about law enforcement, eventually when the indictments come down, you will see the evidence come out. And I truly believe that the federal government will have a lot of prosecutions, a lot of indictments,
No, you're
which
right.
we
I think it's I guess as a journalist, we always expect that we want to see things happen very, very quickly. But look, even this great news happening in Washington now with this letter
yeah,
to the Attorney General with this bill that would make New York have a comparative negligence standard like the rest of the
yeah,
country. So it's slow, and I know that hopefully it will come. Do you have any positive? I think because we're so overexposed to this stuff because we live it every
right.
day. Do you have any positivity left that any further changes can be made to stop this?
Sometimes it takes one person, one group, a group of people to say enough's enough. So, yes, I am 100% positive that you will see changes. They have to. You have elected officials. If you can't afford to live, they're not going to vote for you. If they look at it and say, hey, you did nothing about it, you're not getting voted in. And I think what you see now is like inflation was so high. We went through the pandemic. We went through a really tough time in America and globally. And now's the time for change. And I truly believe you will see a change to that labor law. You will see a change to the way the courts police the lawyers. And I think you'll have a forefront where rates will go down. People will be happy. You got to realize the mental stress of a small business owner not being able to get insurance. And I've spoken to many of them. They file bankruptcy, they lose. Think suicide's a reality, depression's a reality. It's tough enough to live your life every day. Then all of a sudden, someone takes away your paycheck and it's fraudulent. I dealt with a client a couple of days ago. They're like, I got to pay deductibles. Is something you covered? I got to pay deductibles even though I know the person never worked for me. They were fraudulent. And we got dismissed out of those cases, but they're costly. And those are the things we have to lower the cost. We have to give a better product. And you know what? In any of the closing notes, I'd say the industry has to step it up and come join forces with tradesmen and our theory and all. And you know what? Let's shake hands. Let's have a unified front. Anything that's legitimate, Kristin, we will pay. The industry will pay. If someone has a legitimate accident, I got to be honest, it's almost a pleasure this day to give people money because that's what insurance is for. But it's not for the people who steal it, right? So what you may have is a person who's got a legitimate claim, and all of a sudden, like from a mental standpoint, you're like, well, how could this be type thing? So you sort of judge someone who's got a legitimate claim. And then when you investigate it, you see it as legitimate. But, more than 50% of every case that's reported is fraudulent. And it's probably a lot higher. And that's our standard where you can prove it's fraudulent. Um, the open claims on the workers' compensation side, 88% of them are fraudulent, in our opinion.
Mhm.
So 88%. So that's 9 out of 10 workers' compensation claims are fraudulent. And I can say this, the Workers' Compensation Board has been outstanding. They've been doing their due diligence, and you will see changes there as well. Like most governmental agencies, some of them are understaffed. Federal agencies are understaffed, and I think you'll see a change there too. Because if you take $100 billion out of a New York, system, right? That's crazy if you think about it. You got to realize a staged accident with spinal surgery is probably going to cost the average carrier 5 to 6 million. Like when you have demands from these lawyers, these are fraudulent claims staged. We know them. They don't know what we know, but we know who the runners are. At this point, we probably have identified most of every runner in New York State. We know who they are. We know where they live. The federal agencies know who they are, where they are. And you can see, so when you talk about arrests, there have been a lot I can't talk about, but there have been a lot of arrests. And I have to leave it at that. So they are doing their job. And the folks at the FBI and the federal agencies have been wonderful. They get it, they see it, and it's because of stories like you. You broke a story that no one else would. When you look at Operation Sideswipe in Louisiana and that small sector they got, I think there were over 60 arrests there. That's the start. And then all of a sudden you look, once the tradesman litigation hit, that case got real active and arrests were made. So you'll see arrests, you'll see changes. And it's because of brave people like you, Kristin. We thank you very much. You were the only person who would take the story. Obviously we went to a lot of outlets. Some of the bigger newspapers maybe now are trying. But,
Mhm.
for me, like, where's the Wall Street Journal? Where's the New York Times?
Mhm.
Where is CNN? Where is Fox News? Where are all these entities? On a national level, if you saw it, and you saw what the humanitarian component is, what they actually do to people, that's horrific. And
Right.
that's probably the worst crime of anything. Money is money, but you can't replace someone's health. And if you have a child or you're 20 years old and you have surgery that you didn't need, and all of a sudden now you're 35 and you can't walk and you're in pain, you have no money, that's the part. It's a big humanitarian issue
Well,
too.
yeah, and I would encourage, I hope that this podcast eventually reaches some of the immigrant rights groups and
Right.
ones who are involved in human trafficking, because this is absolutely part of it. These people need a voice. It shouldn't have to be us doing it. These people need a voice of the people who represent them, because they are being harmed and they are being trafficked. And for anybody who thinks that a migrant can come to this country and file a claim against a contractor in New York and an insurance company, that is not something they can do. It's because they're being used and manipulated. And I hope that the people in this country who say that they support them and say that they are here to help them adjust to this country, realize that this is affecting that entire group of people. But Don Orlando, thank you so much.
Thank
Director
you,
of
Kristin.
Litigation at Tradesman. You are the man.
Thank you.
Tradesman is taking this on, and just keep it up because change has to happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Hope you have a great day. And thank you for the coverage. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.